I'm sure we've all seen those stickers on the back of trucks, "How's my driving?" Call this number and let us know if there's a problem. I rode from the airport with Lyft a few days ago, and during the ride, halfway through, I received a text asking me to rate the driver with the assurance that whatever I sent would be anonymous. So those type of messages, which we get all the time, even at the checkout, you're asked to evaluate your experience, can lull us into believing that there's an 800 number for everything, to solve every problem. Just report it, and you'll get to feel like a responsible citizen, or at least vent. Maybe you'll dispense justice, maybe revenge. And you can do all that from the anonymity and the safety of the back seat or your desk or the other end of a phone line. But of course, at the same time, you may well ruin someone's career. You may unleash a whole series of tragic events. Who knows? So the three-step process that Jesus outlines in today's gospel for dealing with conflict demands, for that reason, that you first talk to the person who is causing you pain. It's so much easier to leave that person out until the very end, to first complain to your friends, skip to stage 2, convince them of your own innocence and the other person's guilt, gather a posse and succumb to groupthink and the safety of numbers. But of course, that's not how the Christian community works. For us, or at least for God, the sinner always has a voice, a name, a face, and never stands outside the circle of mercy and forgiveness. When every other effort fails, when heart has spoken to heart to no avail, Jesus says, as the last resort, treat that person who has offended you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Remembering, of course, that those two classes of people Jesus was very fond of, in fact, his chosen company for much of his life. Still God's children with unknown possibilities and certainly within the realm of compassion. I think it was in A League of Their Own that Tom Hanks tells one of the team who wants to quit, it's not meant to be easy. If it was easy, anybody could do it. And this isn't easy. We all know this is one of the hardest realities we face throughout our lives, just forgiving. If it was easy, we'd do it all without a moment's hesitation. But each of these three steps that Jesus provides for dealing with someone who has offended us demands that we open our own heart first, that we reveal first to one person, then to two or three, and then to the whole community, how we have suffered, how we have been hurt. You have to reveal your own vulnerability and pain. And that stuff is never entirely rational. You open yourself up to the possibility that first one person and then a small group and then a whole community is going to say, this is really your problem. And so the first step that Jesus requires is that we admit to our own hurt, that we reveal what may be the underlying problem and entrust ourselves to the wisdom and the compassion of others. And when we know our own reliance on those qualities in others, how could we ourselves deny them to another person? And this is the key, of course, to that power of binding and loosing that we talked about last week and here again this week. It's entrusted to the disciples, who are the very people who have failed Jesus so spectacularly. They themselves have received unmerited forgiveness. And so, how could they possibly deny that to anyone else? We cannot demand an account of someone else without first accounting for ourselves. We dare not analyze someone else's behavior before examining our own hearts and relying on that person's mercy. You know, in one of my former parishes, there was a great scandal involving one of our dearest families. And there were TV cameras and reporters in town. There were stories in newspapers all over the state and the country, except for one newspaper, our local newspaper, where there has never been the slightest reference to that drama. That kid had grown up in our parish, had been baptized at our font like these babies will today, was known and loved by everybody. And everybody in town ate at the same restaurants, everybody shopped at the same shops, they all went to the same school, taught by the same teachers. We all knew the story. And it wasn't a happy one, but it was shot through with love all the time. If you've ever lived in a small community, in a small town, on an island, you'll know what everyone in town is struggling with. You know how they've been hurt. You know what they've lost. And because of that, there's often a great gentleness and enormous latitude that's wordlessly offered. I remember my first day in that parish, a retired priest met me at the door and said, "You know, there's one thing you need to know about this town. Everybody comes to the table with their bullets, but nobody fires them." And it seems to me that this process that Jesus outlines is meant to connect people in their frailty, to connect them to the truth and in truth, but to get the real story, the whole story out there, that we speak to one another, that we remain accountable to one another, but we do that in a way that deepens relationship and not destroys it. You know, about halfway through the 3rd century, some very odd men and women emerged in the life of the church, known now as the Desert Fathers and Mothers. They were quite odd, fierce, rugged, single-minded, and even though they did just about everything they could to get away from people, they had a lot to say about relationships. They challenged, reproved, encouraged, chastised. Their counsel was as tough or as gentle as it needed to be. One of the greatest of them, St. Anthony, once wrote, "Our life and our death is with our neighbour. If we win our neighbour, we win God. If we cause our neighbour to stumble, we have sinned against Christ." And so even in the wilderness, they remained acutely aware that they were connected to a wider community, that their relationships, their example mattered, and that teaching others was part of their vocation, and modelling this. And the main reason we know so much about their wisdom is because young people kept going out to them with their problems and asking their advice. When some monks became very upset about other monks falling asleep in choir, they asked Abbot Femon's advice, and he understood what a problem this had come to be for some, at least. And so he said, "When I see a brother who is falling asleep during the office, I lay his head on my knee and let him rest." So these people, these monks and nuns, read the same gospel that we have just heard. They knew that reading very well, but they knew that every community is shot through with frailty and failure and sometimes betrayal. And they saw this reading not as an invitation to join the parish police, but to respond to their brothers and sisters with humility, with gentleness, with enormous respect, and that the work of conversion demands patience, endurance, fidelity. Our translation has Jesus speaking about church church, church. But of course, there was no church in Jesus' time. That didn't happen until Pentecost. The Greek word used there is simply a word for a public assembly of people. And so Jesus was not talking about, at least not just talking about how we behave internally, but how we conduct ourselves everywhere, at all times, as citizens in the broader community, holding one another accountable, challenging one another to greater integrity and fidelity and transparency, to honesty and truthfulness and compassion. This can never be about just our internal life. This is where, however, we learn our craft, where we acquire the skills to equip us to make the kingdom of God a greater reality in the life of our city, our state, our nation, how we create a society here and beyond in which these babies will flourish. So may it be.